I'm here today to apprise you of some recent activity at the council, and it had to do with mapping and identification of important ag lands. This was set out by state statute a few years ago to request the counties parlay and determine how we can, with the Sustainability 2050 plan, come to a conclusion with a mathematical formula, the number of acreage that will sustain us. This formula is to come about with the new agricultural liaison, of which the council has approved and budgeted, and her name is Laura Thielen. She's to do such mapping and identification. However, in the resolution 12-23, when it was heard at the council and committee, it was determined that the urban growth boundary would defeat such purpose. It made absolutely no sense to the council in its deliberations that if they were to identify and map that of which is to sustain us, that of which is of productivity and has water, should be included in such mapping, thus identified. The conference draft 1 reflects that. The floor draft 1 that was passed upon its adoption, of which was a unanimous 9-0 vote, was to merely provide for the communication that Laura Thielen, acting as the agricultural liaison in the mayor's administration, could indeed accomplish this task by April of 2012, this year. The deliberations, of which lasted for more than an hour, were really about if we're going to expend funds for the taxpayer to identify and map important ag lands, it would be futile and moot to not include that of which is truly in production, sustaining us, viability in water. Now, Dr. Dudley, who did testify, did mention some properties, some parcels so named, but the CD1 had referenced what's considered prime ag lands classification A and B. So the classification was determined, the definition made known, so it's an honor and a privilege to come before you and let you know of what recently took place upon full adoption on such measure of February 15th of this year, of a unanimous vote, that the urban growth boundary shall be obsolete in making any such determination of which that can sustain us in this identification and mapping of important ag lands. Mahalo.
Parties, questions? Dr. Dudley?
All right, so Mr. Berg, before this resolution was passed in its original form, it was a resolution to get Laura Thielen to bring forth all of the properties for the city to consider for IAL. Is that correct?
And that is correct, to meet the state statute of recommendation.
And so what happened in that meeting was we discussed the fact that this did not include Hoopili and Coal Ridge and perhaps other properties which were within the urban growth boundary and which were planned for urbanization by the city. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so what the city did then was they voted to nevertheless consider all properties that are prime ag lands, even though they're within the urban growth boundary, and even though they were considered by the city for urbanization, they voted that they would put those into the kitty also, and into the pot also, and study all of them for important ag lands designation. Is that correct?
The deliberations and conclusions of those deliberations found it to be not relevant of the mission at hand, skewed, if you will, in the deliberations, that if they were to exclude from the onset those lands of productivity, made absolutely no sense to the council members.
Absolutely no sense. And so even though the rules of the Land Use Commission say that they need to pay particular attention to lands that are set aside by the counties for urbanization, the city was kind of pulling back from that, right? And saying, well, we're going to reconsider these lands for IAL designation. Is that correct?
If I can elaborate on your question, the EVA, the Mililani, the Kailua, the Kapolei, Makakilo, EVA neighborhood boards had asked the Oahu General Plan be completed first. And if I can then answer your question or your inquiry, is that this seems to be a natural fit to determine just exactly in the identification and mapping process what those important ag lands, prime A and B classification, that they be a party then to the final public hearing process in the Oahu general plan. So the conclusion then would be, it made all sense to have the data, the facts, the inventory before the public, so that the public in such process of finalizing the Oahu general plan with the council, seemed to be roughly a year away from now, that this data, the task from the agricultural liaison, could be, again, included in those deliberations for the public on their behest.
And so as it stands right now, when all of this is said and done, it could be that the city would designate the Hoopili lands and the Koa Ridge lands as important agricultural lands. Is that correct?
The process that I understand it to be would, after the inventory is made available to the public, that it is meant to serve a purpose. The purpose of which the tool is to be utilized for is just that. Deliberations on the Oahu general plan for the greater good of all those participants on the island of Oahu. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
No questions.
Commissioners, questions? No. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.